And we're back once again, everyone. Welcome back on the Perf Podcast. Today, once again, as always, brought to you by Atlas Gunworks, a system for winning. Got a message in my DMs. One of my peeps, I won't say he's local to me, but I do encounter him at some of the same watering holes, if you will. He sent me a message on DM, and this is a very good question that I do get quite a bit. And also, as we get into the 2025 training season, I feel like it's one that people will be looking for and or find their way back to. So wanted to get this one out there because it's so hot right now. So I really wanted to do it. But before we do, welcome to the show, my co-host, Adam Reiser. How are we doing today, buddy?
We're doing good. Dry firing in the basement, so my fingers are bloody because I have to learn how to tube gun again. So,
Dude, do your fingers crack like mine do?
In the winter, if it's really cold, especially if I've been ice climbing a lot, then I get cracked fingers. But haven't so far.
There's a certain type of, must be a humidity change, but there's a certain point in the winter where all of a sudden, like all right around like the edges of my fingernails, the key fingers that I use, like strong side thumb, trigger finger, all that, they get like this crack and they start to hurt. So I start to have like various fingers taped up at work for some reason, and it looks like I was in Fight Club.
Nice. Yeah, the worst is under the fingernail. That's just the damn worst.
Yeah. But yeah, it is dry fire season. It is wicked cold out there today. I think it is a whopping +1 here in southern Wisconsin, which means in my homeland it has to be 15 below zero. So hope you're somewhere warm, taking in a pod, but we wanted to lay this one down because we definitely don't want to do anything outside.
Yeah.
And so today's question is, now there's a lot of directions we can go with pertaining to law enforcement use of competition shooting. So we're going to narrow the scope of our question here to what was asked, because I think that's a cogent topic for a whole episode, and maybe we can get into other stuff. But let's see. John Doe says, LE in competition. Where do we go wrong? Where do we miss things? What can we as LE do to get the most out of competition to bring back to our guys at the range? And this really hits home with me because on my professional side now, I'm very clear to point out this is a personal project. That's why position myself the way I do in this genre. So, but professionally, I am involved with law enforcement sales. I do a fair amount of law enforcement training. I interact with the marksmanship component of law enforcement professionally on a daily basis. Adam, you've done a lot of training in the past, but have you done any law enforcement oriented stuff before?
Yeah, fair amount. Yeah.
What could you give us kind of the like 30,000 foot view of what you've done in the past?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is the training that I do for competition and law enforcement is essentially the same training without stage breakdown stuff added in there. Is the reality of the situation is that shooting is shooting. Tactics are not shooting. They're not the same thing. So shooting is, can I grip the gun, stand correctly, see enough sight picture to hit the thing that I'm shooting at, manipulate the trigger without moving the sights, reload cleanly, all that stuff. Tactics is, don't stand in the open while you're doing that. Like move back behind this car. Like the shooting part is still the same is what I'm getting at. So
absolutely.
The way that I teach LE and competition shooters doesn't change, because both of these people have to be able to shoot very quickly, have to be able to react quickly, have to be able to reload quickly, and then have to shoot super accurately when it's called for and be able to turn that on and off. So it really doesn't change anything.
Yeah, and I'm glad you put it the same way that I do. Like once we're shooting is shooting. When you are lighting off a cartridge, the bullet flies the same no matter what you're doing with it. Tactics is application of shooting, just like competition is application of shooting. It's the end user's goal that really gives it context to make it one or the other. And I think the first fallacy is to think that they are two different things. Now you could get into the martial art of gunfighting. So that's a little bit more, let's say like Krav Maga, jiu-jitsu type stuff where we're at contact distance. But I don't know that that's a different set of skills, and I wouldn't even say those are marksmanship skills. Those are using a gun for fighting in the same realm as a knife, as in the same realm as a baton, something like that. That's not a marksmanship skill. That is its own skill to develop, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in the category of skills that I'm not going to have a professional opinion on because it's just not my lane. If you want to learn how to do that, you should take instruction and courses from people who are vetted and interested and have developed concepts in that. Most of the training that I do around law enforcement, I am associated with a manufacturer, right? So for Vortex Optics, I do a training that I like to say is within arm's reach of optics. So a lot of what I do is introduction orientation to red dot handguns. That's a topic that's very requested these days. One that I've done the most and taught around the country is LVPO, low power variable optics. Teaching that from a manufacturer's perspective. I think that's also a unique take. There are lots of people teaching LPVO scoped carbine courses. A lot of them are my friends. But a lot of those guys are looking at it from the end user standpoint. When I teach, because I haven't done the job, I'm very quick to point out that it's from a shooter's or a manufacturer's perspective. And we've talked a little bit about like my journey towards Grandmaster and things like that. A big motivation for me to get Grandmaster was in this realm, you kind of got to be one or the other for people to take you seriously. You either have to have done the job at a high level to have the credentials, or you have to be an accomplished shooter. So when folks ask, well, who are you? It's kind of a sacred topic, because like there's few things that men want to be the best in the world at, regardless of earned proficiency. And one of them is weapons. Like everybody wants to be the expert in the room at fighting and weapons, even if they're not. They're going to try to be. So when you approach a group of alpha males, like SWAT cops, it's kind of one of those topics where it's like, who are you to talk to us about this? I'm like, well, I'm a grandmaster in 3 divisions. I'm a national champion in 3-gun. That's pretty good. I've at least spent a lot of time shooting guns, and they're like, fair enough. That's kind of the lens that I approach law enforcement training in, that it's kind of a fresh lens or a fresh look at application of marksmanship for the purpose of law enforcement. And kind of like we alluded to in another episode and a soundbite that Adam pulled that was really good. Part of the problem that I perceive as an outside observer, as a salesperson, I'm an asker of questions and I'm an observer of people. All right. So as I observe this community and how they use products and how they train products, that's where we get into that institutional inbreeding of red shirts teaching what has been taught to them, which has been taught to them, which has been taught to them, which probably lineates all the way back to World War II in how things were taught. All right, the 4 firearm safety rules that everyone can kind of rattle off, maybe, or at least closely in their head, that goes back to the U.S. Army in World War II, trying to figure out how to teach a conscript army, i.e. draftees, how not to shoot each other whilst shooting Nazis or Japanese. And so they were designed around fighting, and then it's kind of become bastardized from there. But the challenge that a lot of law enforcement have is that they essentially have to train people how to do this to a certain level safely on a flat range inside of probably one duty day, which is, an 8-hour duty day, so they will mark on their calendar, all right, today is our training day. All right, we have to get as much training in this as possible. They never have enough time. They never have enough budget. Ammo has always been expensive. I think when people were trained on 1911s in the U.S. Army in the 40s, I think they got to shoot something like 1 or 2 magazines. And then you are certified, right? Like, you see the videos out there on YouTube, right, where like the gun is sitting like on a table on the range, and the recruit like walks up to it, looks at it like it's an alien, kind of picks it up, they shoot it shoot a magazine, they set it down, they go look at the target, and then they walk away, right? Like, there's not a whole lot that goes on there. A lot of law enforcement training is developed around having a flat range, so the bullets have to go one way at one target. They're trying to have at least 10 guys on a line at a time of various competencies, and they're trying to get all this done. And so a lot of this has gone around in that vein. The other thing is, this is kind of foreign to a lot of us. If you don't reload, it's definitely foreign to you. At the end of a law enforcement training day, they have to pick up all their brass. Like, that is an accepted part of it. Like, before you go home, we have to police up all this brass. So a lot of the drills or shooting activities are a lot of times revolve around making sure the brass kind of lands in a similar place. Like, they're not really about running around all over the place and making it rain brass everywhere, because then they got to pick that shit up. So law enforcement training gets very linear, all right, which is where we get so excited about cops getting involved in competition shooting, because that is really a place where you can break out of that environment. You're not really going to get a whole lot of variety, and you're not really going to get past the basic level until you kind of get a 3-dimensional environment to shoot in. Would you agree, Adam?
Yeah, 100%. And it's around here, especially because of a couple people who have really driven it. There's a UTLE, Utah Law Enforcement, handgun match and a 2-gun match. Handgun match happens in spring, 2-gun match happens in the middle of summer. Handgun match is like 3 or 4 months away right now, and there are currently 300 people signed up for the handgun match. And then another 200 people signed up for the not a cop match, which happens essentially the next day on the same stages for everybody who's not a cop. But there's 300 people shooting that match, and I think there was about 250 who shot the 2-gun match. So it started off kind of slowly and has grown into that. And the response that I've heard from cops who were never competition shooters, came and shot this match because their buddies were, and now have shot it, 2 or 3 years in a row, have gotten into USPSA, have gotten into 3-gun, have gotten into whatever kind of competition shooting. All of them have said that it has drastically changed their entire approach to shooting, how comfortable they are with guns. And I think one of the things that makes a huge difference, I got in I'd call it a heated discussion with a very left-leaning friend of mine, talking about how I was saying that cops don't get a lot of training on firearms. And they said, that's a good thing. And I said, no, it's not. Because, one, when they pull out that gun and start shooting, I want that person to be the best person with that gun, especially if I'm around when this is taking place. But also, if you're super competent, if you're a really high-level shooter and you understand your proficiency, especially coming from a holster, people talk about de-escalating stuff. You know what makes things way harder to de-escalate? When there's a gun pointed at somebody. So if you can do the talking separate from having the gun out because you know you can produce the gun in a certain amount of time, that opens up a lot of doors, and competition helps with things like that. Basically, people get way better, which makes them way safer with the thing that they're better at.
Yeah, and I think also, especially people that, tend to listen to podcasts like this, right? Like, I think a lot of people perceive a career in law enforcement kind of like a cowboy movie. Like, people got into this line of work because they wanted to strap on a Buscadero rig and clean up the streets of Tombstone. And I think I think most, if not all, people in law enforcement are well-intentioned, but vast majority of them don't get into it to be gunfighters. Gunfighting is something they might have to do, but I think actually the guy in my RO class for USPSA, he put it very well because he's a fireman. He said, cops feel about guns the way firemen feel about hoses. Pretty accurate representation. And, pick another topic that you're not interested in, all right? Pick, an easy one is medical, all right? Like, most people didn't get into law enforcement to administer a lot of first aid, but guess what? They get exposed to a lot of when help is delayed, first aid response, so it's something they need to know something about at a functional level. And so one time I was talking with one of my cop friends, and I was like, hey, so we feel like you're not trained well enough on firearms. So I'm like, do you think there's anything that you're supposed to know how to do that you're adequately trained on? Quick answer was no. All right, so like, do you feel like you know as much about driving as you should? No. Do you think you know as much about first aid as you should? No. Do you think you feel like you should know as much about, conflict resolution? No. Firearms are right there in that category. I think the first place to really bring it into shooting, though, where do we go wrong? I think the first place law enforcement goes wrong is they really only look at two types of firearms training. They look at qualifications, and they look at scenarios. They can't really separate beyond that. If it's not a qual, then it has to be a scenario, and a scenario essentially is a test, right? So they keep trying to take tests, and they retake the test until they get the right answer, hopefully, and they call that good enough. There isn't really room in the middle for exploratory skill building, right? There's not time or budget for things like that. So I think the first place they go wrong is they can't separate from a qual or a scenario into just an application, just like an application of skills, which is what a competition is, or a growth period. It's such a pessimistic trade, and the consequences of getting things wrong are so heavy that there is no tolerance for error. So as soon as you throw a close Charlie, fail. It's just it's just an instant negative reinforcement. And so people live so far in their safe space of trying not to fail because that's just such an unthinkable thing. They never really push their skills to a place where they can grow beyond the tadpole stage, like they're just kind of stuck in infancy forever.
Well, and if you actually look at, police shootings, like I'm not a cop. I have no experience in any of this, but I do have the internet. The way that those go down is not the way that a qualification happens. And the reality of the situation is people are running rounds out of guns at a pace that they definitely cannot, they're shooting Charlies in real shootings for sure. Like, the reality of the qual is I need to do this thing so I can be a cop, but it's not training for all of a sudden I'm in a car or next to a car and they're shooting and I'm shooting back and you're ducking behind doors and things are all happening super fast. Like, there was a police shooting on a subway in New York a little while ago. Dude with a knife charged one of the cops. So a couple cops opened up on the guy. 4 people on the subway got shot. None of them were the dude with the knife. Like, the reality is that the qual, like, we have some competition shooting friends who are police officers, and they're like, it's embarrassing. Like, we're at a USPSA match. They're like, any shooter here, D class or better, could pass the qual. Like, that doesn't make you, that doesn't make you competent. That means that, like, you can get the gun out of the holster, point it generally downrange, shoot one shot a second, and then put it away without accidentally shooting anybody. But that's not the reality of the level of competency you need when things are coming unglued in a really big hurry. And, we talk a lot about, subconscious competence and things along those lines, where it's like we don't think about how to draw or how to reload or how to do any of those things when we're shooting a stage. They just happen because we've done them so much that they're ingrained. And I feel like you would want that same level of competence. So if you're in a situation where a gun needs to come out, you don't have to think about the actions of the gun coming out. You can just produce it and act accordingly.
Right. And also equate it back to I think most of us took a driving test, right? And when you go to the DMV, take a driving test, I think even now today, as guys who are well north of 30, we would probably still go to the DMV today, and if we had to retake the driver's test, we would be nervous because it's not a natural environment to drive in, right? Whereas you do kind of have to get out there on the road, have some experience. And now, no matter what you think about the people that drive around you, by and large, on the daily, most people get from point A to point B without running into stuff, right? But that's a learned skill, and they kind of have to get out there and experience it a little bit. Vast majority of law enforcement, if they're not independently interested in or exposed to shooting, really the only exposure they ever get to shooting is that DMV driving course. So anything that a department can do to get out of that realm is a positive from a marksmanship standpoint. And another thing, when we're approached to do training, because we're fairly open-ended in what we'll do, we'll kind of give, and just kind of the way our company works, we're like, okay, well, what kind of training do you want? What would you like to do? I don't know. What can you do? We'll just give them the whole menu. It's like, dude, we can do pistol, we can do carbine, we can do long range, we could do CQB, we could do shooting on the move, we could do blah 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 blah. And usually a ranking commander will be like, yeah, let's do all of that in an 8-hour day. It was like,
you're like, this is 2 weeks worth of courses, dude.
Yeah. This is 6 months worth of what from that did you? Oh, we want a little bit of all of that. Okay, well, the good news. Well, good news, bad news. Bad news is that's impossible. Good news is the closest thing you can get to a diverse experience in marksmanship challenges is a match. Is a USPSA, a 3-gun, a 2-gun match. This is an organic presentation of non-linear shooting skills, right? And then there's some element of stress because there's other people around, there's timers around, there's scores around, and there's an element of precision. We have targets that need to be hit to some degree, and hitting the periphery doesn't score as well as hitting the middle. And there's a 3-dimensional environment. Most USPSA stages involve some level of moving around props, barricades, or things you have to interact with. And that puts you in some of those situations where you have to be like, well, how would I do that? Man, I can't see around that wall very well. I can't put my feet in the perfect position. How well positioned do my feet need to be? Or does it matter? Should I transition to my weak hand so I can get a better angle around this wall? I think, and this is some of the training that I really like to bring to departments. And Adam mentioned the Utah law enforcement pistol match. We're planning on doing this for that match this spring, if that's interesting to you. But I like to bring a group of law enforcement to a USPSA setup range, not for a match, but usually if it's a USPSA or an action pistol oriented match, I try to do it the day after, right? So they already had the experience of shooting the match, and okay, we're back here. You tried this once. Here's some things we can look at, some component pieces, and then we'll work those component pieces, and then we'll run the stage again, and we'll see how the scores improve. But if you can separate a match from a scenario, it's not a scenario. It is a bunch of component pieces of organic shooting that you kind of have to negotiate. Think of it as an obstacle course for shooting. That's how I really look at action shooting when it's applied to law enforcement training. For a long time, the Minneapolis Police Department growing up, they had a shooting team. It was an encouraged activity for these guys to go out to action pistol matches and shoot, because that's probably the most efficient and cheapest training you could give officers, is just to give them ammo, give them $20 and have them go shoot the match. Instead of having to compile all of that into a rented range with on-the-clock instructors, everybody's clocked in, all the insurance, all the everything, ventilation systems if it's inside. Like, if you just send your dudes to shoot matches, they are going to organically get better. And that happened for a long time. Regime change happened. That chief he's kind of like the person that Reiser is referring to, like, oh, well, we don't want our cops to be gunfighters. All right, they pulled all the funding for that program, and the scores went down. But their training costs also went up. So I think it is the best kind of organic exposure to challenges and opportunities to learn component skills that you can get. That's kind of the second aspect of how I look at matches for improving law enforcement skills.
Yeah, I mean, nothing to add. That's I don't know anybody who is what I would consider, there used to be the whole competition will get you killed on the streets thing. When I started shooting in 2013, that was a big deal, and I got a lot of shit from people for going to shoot in competition, even though I wasn't even in a profession where I carried a gun. Like, that wasn't a thing. I'm like, if I get in a rifle fight around a house, like, as a civilian, some things have gone catastrophically wrong. Like, that's
absolutely
not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to go have fun with my boys. But there used to be that idea that, like, competition is bad for the tactical world because it'll teach you bad habits, et cetera, et cetera. Find me a former Delta guy, DevGru guy, Special Forces guy these days, post-GWAT, who still believes that. All right. Those guys agree. Like, yeah, if you want to get really, really, really good at pistol shooting, you go shoot USPSA matches. If you want to get really good at carbine stuff, you shoot 2-gun and 3-gun. If you want to get really good, like, the snipers go to PRS matches and just get curb stopped by dentists all the time. Like, the people who do this stuff in their free time and it's their passion naturally get super good at it, and the people who have to do it as a requirement for a job don't, unless they're willing to make that leap, or their department is.
Yeah, and that's that component of being able to separate a scenario from an exercise. A match is an exercise. It's a test of component skills. A lot of LE are very linear in that it's either a qual or it's got to be a scenario. Well, I wouldn't want my guys to blah 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 blah. It's just not going to happen that way. Like, to develop any level of competent skill, you got to handle the gun. And I think there's a desire for to make it kind of so simple an idiot can do it that they don't really leave any room for people to excel. But I think that's with the kilt in the streets kind of thing, that is completely, it's not being able to separate an exercise from a scenario. And then it's also somewhat used as a safe space for people who don't want to put themselves out there, who don't want to get measured. They're kind of like, oh, well, I don't want to do that because, blah, blah, blah. It's not applicable to what I do. Like, they're trying to separate the two things. It's a bit of a safe space in that they don't want to know what level they're at because they know it's not very good.
Yeah. I think they have an idea and they're not happy about where they might end up at. Man, especially so. I remember, when I was teaching down at TPC back in the day, Jay Lease and Justine Williams would take classes down there when they were super young, and on the regular, absolutely slaughter dudes who were, former and current military, former and current law enforcement. And some feelings got super hurt. Like people who thought of themselves as the baddest dude around getting beat by a 13-year-old girl. Yeah, we saw some cranky individuals in those days. And the thing is, there's two types of people out there. There's people like Keith Garcia is a great example. So Keith Garcia was a cop, went to a competition shooting thing. I can't remember if it was USPSA or 3-gun, what it was, thinking he was the shit, and got absolutely massacred. And instead of taking his ball and going home like most do, he was like, oh, turns out I'm super not good at this thing that I thought I was good at, because this, all these other people who aren't cops can absolutely crush me at it. And so he poured himself into it and became, 3-Gun Nation national champion and held up the big check. So like people will go one of two ways. It seems like they'll either go, oh, I'm not good at this thing that I think I was good at, which also, by the way, could save my life if I'm actually good at it. Or they're like, I don't like the way it made me feel to not be good at this thing, and they just leave.
Yep.
And I don't know if there's anything that can be done about those. But I think one thing that's really missed through a lot of the conversations in this world, and I never really this is the most I've ever really talked about this in one go, because it's not my lane at all. I don't do any, outside of just teaching people how to shoot, I don't do anything specifically for law enforcement or specifically for military, but I have a lot of LE and mil guys in classes, and I've taught some departments and stuff like that, but it's just shooting, like I said. The thing that's really missed is nobody actually talks about practice outside of that class or that match or that qual or that whatever. Like what for percentage of time spent, I bet if you took like my time shooting as 100%, just my time shooting guns or handling guns, I bet the time that I'm shooting guns on the clock is 3%.
If that.
Maybe less, maybe 1. I might spend an hour of practice, either dry fire or live fire, for every 60 seconds I spend shooting in a match.
Oh yeah, and so I would say I do not have access to unlimited ammunition. I do have access to more resources than most people. I still would say that live fire shooting in that pie that Riser's talking about, live fire shooting is still less than 10%.
Oh yeah.
Probably less than 5. Right?
Yep.
Live fire shooting, and that I think that's probably another misconception, is that the live fire range is where we can learn things. Really, at the intermediate to advanced level, the range is where you confirm what you've learned on the dry fire range, right? Like ammunition has always been expensive, right? Did I tell a story about my grandpa in another show, or did I imagine that in my head?
Yep. The two frogs or two birds or whatever.
Yeah, the two ducks thing. All right,
ducks, you already told me.
Ammo has always been expensive. All right, so nobody has access to as much as they want. So the best use of ammunition is really just to confirm what you've already learned in dry fire skills, and going forward. That's really all, and that's why I don't do a whole lot of Instagram running around on the range, because I do all that at home. I got rubber mats at home that I can save my knees instead of running around on concrete. All right, so like all that stuff happens other places, and live fire is just a confirmation of it. Yeah, it's a very small percentage, but actually bringing it to the range once in a while will highlight what you do and don't need to improve on. That a lot of times is the direction for somewhere to go. Bombing a classifier is if I don't do well on a classifier stage, guess what I'm practicing the next week until that's never a problem again, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think competition, like matches especially, the really interesting thing that they do is they give you an opportunity to learn what you're actually not good at and what you are good at and where you can improve. The problem with taking a qual and then getting that check mark and then going about your day, and then one day that traffic stop goes wrong and all of a sudden you're in a gunfight. If it turns out that you're not as good as you think you are, you get shot or you accidentally shoot somebody else, or like the consequences of that are catastrophically bad, right? And you can go to a match, and granted, it's not the same thing as that, but it is high level skill set, moving, shooting quickly, reloading quickly, getting in and out of positions, seeing sights, getting hits on target. You can, to a certain extent, get a rough simulation of the skill set involved in, any shooting, and learn what you're good at and what you're not good at, and live through the day and go home and be able to improve. And that, like, just that component of it is so huge, because people are, they're sucked into this idea that they're good because of the profession that they're in. And the only time they have to actually prove that is a qualifier that any competition shooter worth their salt would pass, with a freaking snub nose 380, or in an actual shooting where lives are on the line. And that's, both of those are terrible places to learn. Like,
Yeah.
they're just not, those aren't fun. Like, those are both awful.
I think another area that the law enforcement training world could take a page from the competition shooting world is in the scoring. All right. While marketed horribly, hit factor scoring is probably the best measure of what professionals are trying to accomplish with a handgun, or a rifle for that matter, with a firearm, in some sort of defensive, offensive, stress-induced environment. So hit factor, what is hit factor? It doesn't really translate into a whole lot, and the reason it's poorly marketed is it's points per second is what it is. If I can get more points per second than you, I win. However, if you're just concerned with points, and I can shoot a little bit sloppier to get more points faster than you, I still win. Some people don't like that. They don't like that. Well, I can center punch the middle and not win. The most American thing to do in the world is to point a gun at a target and shoot a cloverleaf group. All right? So, but that has very little application of actually using lethal force, right? The point of lethal force is, it's not even necessarily that it's lethal, right? Now, I go to the ballistics demos for Federal Ammunition quite a bit, because Johan is a colleague and a friend. And in his presentation, he's like, the part about them dying is kind of a fringe unfortunateness. The reason police shoot people is to incapacitate them. Just so happens that some of the most effective ways to incapacitate people are highly lethal. And so just because we shoot somebody doesn't mean they're automatically going to die. Or if they are going to die, it doesn't mean that they're going to die immediately. All right? So if you've crossed the threshold into, I need to use lethal force, I need to engage this person with lethal force, you need to start transferring energy to them. All right? We would, in the competition world, we would call that scoring points. All right? Certain places you can hit people will score more points than other people. That's why the targets kind of resemble humanoid figures. And so there are, they talk about timers and switches in the human body. There's certain places where you can hit that starts a timer on that person dying. There's other places you can hit someone in the human body. That's an off switch. Like the very famous FBI shootout in the 80s. Very, very famous shootout. Go Google it if you want to. We'll just boil it down.
The footage is crazy.
Yes.
It's
the first
at a time
shot,
when that had never happened.
Yes. the first shot fired by an agent in that altercation was lethal to the suspect. The very first bullet went through his arm, into his chest, and stopped a couple inches short of his heart, but went all the way through his lungs. All right?
Oh, I didn't actually know that.
Yeah. Dead man walking the whole time.
How long was that shootout? Like 40 minutes or something crazy?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah.
Because, there's all kinds of stuff been written about it. But so that was a good hit, a lethal hit, did not incapacitate the suspect. And that was the beginning of the FBI using 10 millimeter auto, and then what subsequently led us to 40 Smith & Wesson, subsequently led to what we accept as common knowledge for expandable bullet design now. All right, this knowledge that just getting a good hit was not enough. And so back to the point I was making with scoring, right? So hits per second, hit factor scoring, the amount of points you got divided by the time it took you to get them is a very accurate measure of appropriate skill, like appropriate marksmanship with urgency. And I would say there's very few other scoring methods that I've seen that come even close to challenging and testing both. Usually we see either really ridiculous points oriented systems like B8 drills, right? Like they're trying to shoot the center of an NRA B8 target, which is there is a time and a place for that level of precision. But if that's all you're focusing on, you're not learning any of the dynamic skills to do that aggressively. And at the same time, a lot of times when a law enforcement program puts some kind of time limit on something, they give them way too much time. So they'll say, bill drill, reload, bill drill in under 20 seconds. Like, that's an absurd amount of time. All right? Right? No, I made that up. But like in my class, a lot of times to get this going, I'll have guys like, all right, hey, call a shot for us. Like, what should we do? He's like, oh, well, we're gonna engage target A and then take a knee and engage target B. All right, how much time should we take to do that? Like 15 seconds. Like, dude, that's super easy. All right.
What about 3?
Well, what about you do it? I'll time you, and then everybody has to beat your time. What? Like, just trust me. So this dude, he has laid out some challenge, and he has to do it in front of all his friends. That's his stressor, right? Like, how fast can I actually do this and pull it off? So he has the challenge of the unknown, and then everybody that goes after him, they're kind of gauging on, they have the stress of like, they don't exactly know how long their skill set takes to achieve this. And so hit factor points per second, I think, is another thing that law enforcement could take into their quals. Not an arbitrary 5, 10, 20 seconds. Like, hey, here's the scoring zones on this target. You need to get this many points per second. You need a hit factor of this. And I think if they digested it into something more tangible than this hit factor that most people who even play USPSA don't understand that it's points per second. So like if you could boil it down to something like that, like it's a function of acceptable hits with urgency. I think that's another thing that law enforcement could take from the competition sports and integrate into their training and qualification programs.
Yeah. And looking at the difference from an outsider's point of view between what a police qual looks like and what an actual shooting looks like, especially shootings that are like traffic stops, domestic violence, you're not rolling up to a house where it's like, hey, this guy is shooting and everybody rolls in there appropriate. Like a shooting that happens out of nowhere, the speed that everything happens at is so quick. You're already so far behind the power curve if you think you're going to write a guy a ticket and all of a sudden he's coming out of the window with a shotgun. And the idea that speed is not important in a tactical sense is laughable. Like I don't understand how people can stand up behind that opinion, because you hear it a lot, like, oh, speed is fine, but accuracy is final. But no, you need both of those things. Like, they are both super important.
The speed of violence is very fast.
It's very fast. And then the idea that, so a lot of people look at competition shooting, especially when they don't understand the scoring system, and they're like, oh, they're just hosing rounds and you're not even seeing their sights and this and that and everything else. And it's like, no, you're shooting appropriately aggressive for the target that you're shooting at, and that level of aggression might change throughout the stage. It's like the Two Gun Nationals that we just shot, which will now be 2 months before this podcast comes out. But yeah, shooting super aggressive, and then you need to shoot a flying clay with a pistol, which requires very clean trigger press, very good sight picture, all of those things, right? So it's like transitioning back and forth between, as fast as you can shoot, and then pausing appropriately to take that one shot on an 8-inch plate at 45 yards with a pistol. Like that switch between super fast and super accurate, and then the gray area in between happens like multiple times per stage on any really decent stage, honestly.
Well, yeah, and learning the sight picture that goes with it, because people will hear the terms fast and slow. They assume when fast happens that we're not seeing anything, but we're certainly not seeing the level of precision in a sight picture that we would see to shoot a perfect B8 drill, 100%. But we are seeing something, and we're developing a level of understanding of how much of a sight picture do we need to see to get the hit that we want. If all we know in the world of sight picture is extreme precision B8 shooting, when you need just good enough to change this guy's attitude about stabbing me, that's different. But that's not hosing bullets. That just might be the quintessential minute of man, right?
Yeah.
Until, there's different applications there's levels and different understanding the levels of how much of a sight picture you need or don't need to get the hit that you need or don't need is a thing. Like, we were shooting El Prez yesterday, at the local match here, 99-23, the El Prez. It has some hardcover and some no-shoots around it, right?
Nuevo El Prez, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So, to shoot this GM like I'm trying to do, you got to get this thing clean in under 6 seconds, all right, with a turn. And so, to shoot it at the limit of human function, yeah, you're pretty much throwing it up there, letting it happen, and hoping that the bullets land. Meaning hoping, because they put a no-shoot right up next to the A zone. So if you miss within the margin of human error, pretty decent chance you're going to clip that no-shoot target. But that's the limit of human function, right? That's the best it's ever been shot, is under 6 seconds, all alphas. You don't have to be a grandmaster to be effective at this, right? But introducing that same level of challenge, like, well, getting alphas without going outside the boundaries, that is a certain level of skill. And to just shoot it slowly is not that hard, because the A zone is wide open. But as you start adding in speed, you're going to get a sloppier sight picture. So how much do you need to see? How close are you willing to let the sights get towards the penalty target before you let a shot loose? That's some of the stuff that you can learn from a competition environment when it's just cardboard downrange.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think and especially when you get into like high level competition, the approach to stuff, you have sort of like match mode and practice mode. And practice mode is where you are really swinging for the fences, you're making mistakes, you're shooting no shoots, you're shooting misses. You don't win major matches, especially shooting a no shoot on every other stage.
As long as you're learning from those misses.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you can do all those things in practice, and then when it comes to major match time, I'm not talking the locals, I'm talking big matches. You need to be super fast. You need to be super accurate, and you need to be super clean. You don't want penalty points. Now, granted, no shoots on, a practical shooting application isn't the same as no shoots in the quote unquote real world, but the point is the same. In order to win big matches, you have to shoot clean. You have to essentially shoot the same speed you would want to shoot if all of these people were shooting back at you, because that speed is as fast as you can go while still hitting the thing that you mean to hit and not hitting any of the things that you don't mean to hit. And, people talk about, oh, well, you got to really slow it down for, this and that because every bullet has a lawyer attached to it and blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, at major match winning level of aggression, you're not missing anything. You're not shooting no shoots. You are shooting the center of the target extremely fast. It's the same thing.
Reiser didn't beat me at PCSL Nationals because he slowed down and got his hits. He beat me because he got less penalties, right?
Yep.
So same kind of thing there. What do you think about this whole train as you fight? Like, if you're a law enforcement officer going to a competition to hone your work skills, what are your thoughts around shooting in quote unquote kit?
I have no I'm a little bit torn about kit. I think it's fine to shoot in your kit if that's what you want out of it. If you want to actually compare yourself against people, like a lot of people will shoot. I've seen people shoot USPSA stages like they're clearing a house, right? So they're like creeping through and they're shooting around the walls and trying not to expose themselves and stuff like that. The point of the whole thing is the competition. It's having a number at the end that says, hey, of the 140 people here, here's how you actually stack up at the skill of shooting, not tactics. There's a reason that, there's all of these things. There's the tactical games and IDPA and all of this other stuff. And none of these things actually have tactics as a part of them. The reason is that tactics are kind of slow, and you can't have a timed event with intentionally slow tactics in it. And it's like, listen to any SF guy who spent a lot of time, in the GWAT. Those dudes will say early in the war, we ran into buildings and a lot of people got shot. And then we stopped running into buildings and we slowed stuff down and we, cleared things from the periphery before we had to, step through a doorway. And tactics changed a lot. The shooting is still the shooting. So if you are going to a USPSA match, I highly, highly recommend just shooting the thing straight up as if you're trying to compete at that match. Now, once you are quite good at your skill set and you want to take the shooting part and make sure that it works around all of your stuff, sure, throw on your plates, throw 6 mags across the front of you, wear a bump helmet, do whatever you want. But early on, I think it makes way more sense to shoot it like it is a sport as opposed to a training thing for a tactical situation, because that will take all the tactics out of it and leave you with just the shooting portion of it.
I'm glad you brought that up. That reminded me of another thing I wanted to touch on, and that's, so I don't teach CQB.
I have a hard out in about 12 minutes, so okay. Just so you know.
Okay. I don't teach CQB, all right? I am party to some CQB training, all right? So people who do teach that explain the difference between CQB and hostage rescue. We have had people come in wanting to learn hostage rescue, but they're not willing to push the speed. The difference between CQB and hostage rescue is priority of life switches from the officers to the hostage. If the hostage is number one, that's essentially them running in, trying to get the hostage, and they're willing to take a hit if they do it. That's fast CQB. Picture a school shooting, all right? The slower they go into that school, the more kids are going to get shot. if you have to think of competition as anything, think of it as hostage rescue. All right?
Ooh, I like it.
So if you can't go fast, you can't choose to be fast. If you can go fast, you can always choose to be slow. Right? I can drive very aggressively on the highway, but I can choose to go 25 miles an hour if I want to. If all I know is 25 miles an hour grandma pace, if you need to go faster, you don't have that skill set, right? That's kind of fast and loose. So if you have to think of it anyway, think of it as hostage rescue. Back to the equipment, because we're going to try and wrap it up. You have to know the skills, and you have to know what right looks like before you can excel at doing weird stuff. So, like, that's training in kit, I think, goes back to that, the captain, the lieutenant wanting to check as many boxes as possible. I've taught in a lot of classes where they make their guys wear all their kit, but it's like these guys are struggling to learn what they're trying to learn because they're fighting around all this equipment they have to use. Whereas if we were gonna teach a brand new person how to shoot, we would use the most basic gun and the most basic range, and we would do the most basic things first, and then we would add layers on top of it. So if you're newer to this, I would use less your kit, all right, and then start adding it in as you're comfortable. You do need to have some familiarity with it to use it on the street, but don't introduce the equipment in a competitive environment until you understand how to compete in a competitive environment first. Is what I would say there. And then also one more thing to bring it out. I was looking at a bunch of I was actually looking for some schematics for 3Gun Nation for the old classifiers for a thing I'm doing. And so I watched some of that old, like 2010, 2011 3-gun video. I think I sent you some of that.
Yeah, you sent me the trailer to the 3-Gun Nation one from Iron Man.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be an On the Perf podcast if we didn't reference Iron Man or
Hard as Hell.
Hard as Hell.
The official On the Perf drinking game.
All right. So I sent that to Adam the other day. But if you look at action shooting as it existed back then, the shooting has got way more aggressive. Like back then,
yeah.
I think you could have shot 25 splits and been pretty hot shit. Like if you watch Taron Butler shoot in his heyday, it looks nothing like what you're seeing now. Even him, he's shooting faster now at his arm's length range. And he's speeding it up 5%.
I sure hope they're shooting frangibles there. That whole thing looks so sketchy.
It's so sketchy. But anyway, I mean, like the shooting you see commonplace now. I mean, the stuff Hunter Constantine is doing for funsies on his YouTube channel is 30% faster than match-winning splits in the 2010s, early 2000s.
Oh, yeah.
And you also look at the equipment. The equipment has evolved quite a bit. Competitive equipment has evolved into the tactical market. Look at the SOP mod program for the M4, Block 2, the URGIs that they're now using. That is a militarized 3-gun rifle, all right? That came out of the AMU, consulting on what they needed for a DMR rifle. If you look at belt-mounted equipment, all right, where do people put their stuff, all right? The propensity for appendix carry and how fast that draw is. If you look at an appendix draw from now and then you go and look at a competition rig that Rob Latham was wearing in the late 80s, the gun's in a pretty similar place. It's just not inside his waistband. Yeah. All right, so a lot of that stuff. And then even within the last couple of years, we've seen accessories for belt-mounted equipment that puts negative cant on holsters. They're starting to tilt it forward. Why are they doing that? Faster draws, but also they figured out that, oh, hey, that's more accessible when I'm sitting down in a car. It lets them, it's more comfortable for them in a mechanized environment, and it's a faster draw. So they started going from the FBI cant 15 degrees behind the point of your hip to getting it in front of their hips and then starting to put it in a position where their hand falls naturally on it and they can get a faster draw. All of this was test bedded and vetted in the crucible of competition. It's a great way to shake out your gear and see like, hey man, if I really have to pull a magazine from that mag pouch, is that where I want it? And is that where I want all the stuff that's around it if I have to get at it fast? It's a great way to shake out all of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, all around, I just, to wrap it up, I kind of only see upside. Like,
I do too.
To be a guy who works in a tactical environment, to go shoot competition, I see only upside. I see no downside. All it can possibly do for you is teach you more skills, give you a realistic expectation of your skills so you understand what you can and cannot do in a stressful environment, give you an opportunity to fail in a way that's not going to cost you your life or a lawsuit or losing your job or something else. It's only upsides. The only downside maybe is shooting isn't cheap. But you know what? Dry fire is free. So you can do a lot of dry fire, get a couple hundred rounds of something cheap and go shoot a local match, and you will learn so much from that experience.
Absolutely. And you know what else is free, Adam?
This podcast.
And the training that I do professionally. If you would like me to come out to your agency and speak on or teach something that is within my lane to teach, that currently is something we do for free. Why is that? Because we believe in empowering the customers with knowledge. All right. So yes, I am a sales guy. And yes, if you saw Way of the Gun, you can never trust a bag man. But I do believe the reason that I was given these resources and developed the skills that I have is to share them. I think it is, and my managers also agree, it is a betterment of our community if we share that information. So if you are in an agency and you are like, yes, how do I get this? On the perf podcast at gmail.com, or call in on the 800 number and hit 9 until you get to me. It is something that we will bring out to your agency for free. We can discuss those details offline. Or if you're going to the Utah Law Enforcement Pistol Match this spring, we are looking at doing a session during the week in conjunction with that match. So get with myself, Jared, or Colby, and we will figure out a way to get you in there. But I hope that answered John Doe's question. If there's something that we didn't get to that you wish we would dive into more in-depth, on the perf podcast at gmail.com, or get at us. I'm 3Gun AMAX almost everywhere. He's Adam Reiser everywhere. And if you ask us an interesting question, God bless it, we will do a podcast on it.
Yes, indeed.
So with that, keep those overlay cards handy. This is On the Perf Podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.